Good morning, everyone. Yes, I need to use this. Good morning. My name is Magda Theodoridou. I'm the chair of the Gender Equality and Diversity Working Group of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. And I'm really happy to see all of you here. Please feel free to come closer if you want. It may facilitate the discussion. But you can stay there if you don't want to move. Okay. So I would like to invite our speakers to come on stage, please. A couple of information about the structure of this session. So after a short introduction, each speaker will talk to you about a different topic within the frames of gender equality and diversity for leadership in research. And then we will have enough time for a discussion, and we are willing to draft a statement afterwards with all the important points of this discussion. So feel free to interact and share your ideas, your experiences, the problems or good parts of working in this field that you have faced, or anything else you may want. And this can be done as a direct question to each one of the speakers, or as a general question that can be discussed by all of us. So the idea of this session is based on the fact that, looking at the statistics from the European Union, which are actually one of the most encouraging ones all over the world. So we think that we are doing well in the European Union, and this is true in a way. Things are much worse in other countries and other continents. Sorry. So let's start with our association having to deal with the European Union. So looking only at the results of the European Union, you can see that the percentages and the gender representation is quite good in over different steps of career in academia. And this is really close to 50% until the stage of a postdoc. And from there, it really widens. And that's where leadership comes. So we decided to focus this session on this specific problem. And we wanted to approach this issue from different points of view and specific fields of the whole field. I've met all these people either online or in person during the past years, and I'm really happy that I could put all of this together. The first speaker will be Daniel Conley, and we met in Japan. We were both invited about a year ago to talk about gender equality in geosciences. And I saw his beautiful presentation showing numbers. And then we had a discussion how important that is to convince people whether there is a problem or not. And then there is no doubt that actually we should deal with that we should address and solve whatever comes out of these statistics. So he will start the presentation today. I can give you the...
Okay. Could we bring my presentation up, please?
Yes. Oh, no, yeah.
Good morning, everybody. As Magda mentioned, my name is Daniel Conley. I'm a chemical oceanographer. I'm also a biogeochemist. I study how elements cycle in the ocean. But mostly I'm a nerd. And my colleague, Johanna Stadmark, has been a researcher working with me for the last number of years. And she loves numbers. And together with Claudia and myself and Joanna, we all like data. And I think it's important that we use data to substantiate some of the comments we're making. And so that's what I'll talk about today. And it's primarily concerned gender bias. And we all know that there are a number of inequalities in life and in the workplace. And there are some really well-known examples of bias. And one of them is the evaluation of job applications. There's been a number of studies that have shown that. There's big differences in pay inequalities between men and women. There's bias in scholarly publications in terms of promotion on who gets promoted and who doesn't, and things like credit for work done. So one of the things we were interested in a few years ago was the role in publishing. And this was a paper published in Nature in 2012, where Nature wrote an article about themselves, or an op-ed, and they basically figured out that they had problems with sexism. And the first part of it, I think we had a hand to do with it. We were looking at things like news and views and perspectives in science, and looking at how many men and women were writing those. And what's important about those are they're invitation-only pieces. It's not what's coming in as a submission, is that they often ask different people to write these pieces. And in my field, in the earth and environmental sciences, it was only 4% of people writing these were women. And when we submitted this to Nature, they didn't like it. They thought we were wrong. We had to send them all of our data and explain how we got the data. And then they took the paper and they rewrote it, as Nature and Science can do for papers. And they toned down what we said. And they sent it back to us. And we reacted badly. We think we reacted really well. And we said no. We said, we're going to hold on to our ideas. And we sent it back to Nature. And we waited a month and a half for their response. And we thought, oh, we almost had this paper in Nature. And they came back a month and a half later and said, you're right. So we'll publish this. And then 5 months later, they published this article talking about themselves. And I think one of the problems is 70% of the people that work at Nature are women. And they couldn't believe that they would be biased, but they were. And they have changed, which is good. The other thing that really, I think, from my perspective, changed the world, and it's not because I'm in Sweden now. The top one is actually a headline that was in the New York Times. And it was a scandal that rocked Sweden in 1997. And it first made it into the newspapers in Sweden, and then it made it into the newspapers throughout the world, and then into Science and Nature as different comments. And what happened, the Swedish Medical Research Council was made up of only men. And they were only picking men to get assistant professorships. And so people asked if they could see the data, and they weren't allowed to. And so they had to go to court to sue the medical foundation to release the data. And they released it, and they found that there were a number of women that were equally qualified as men. And it really changed the world in the sense that now many science foundations are very aware of this problem, and they think about it a lot when they're giving grants out. I've worked both at the European Research Council and also at the Swedish Research Council, and it's discussed at very high levels about the to make sure we have parity between those people that are applying and those people getting money. So this is data from the European Research Council, and this is a much larger data set, and we're going to try and publish it this summer. As part of the European Geophysical Union, there's a special session here in Vienna in 2 months, and I'll talk about this data. And we have a special issue of the EGU journal that will publish the different contributions in. But this, what we were trying to do was look at different areas of Europe. And we couldn't just use Sweden because the numbers weren't high enough. We had to bring in data from Norway and Denmark, which are called the Scandinavian countries. And we compared it to France. And then we looked at the overall success rates across Europe. And so the first bar is the success rate of men. And in Scandinavia, men have a higher success rate than the second bar, which is that of women. And in France, it's the opposite. Women seem to be more, are better at getting ERC grants. But if you look across all physical science and engineering fields in the European Union, there's parity between men and women. There are 2 other programs. There's a social science program, and there's a biology and medicine program, and they're parity in there as well. And it changes a little bit if you go from starting grants, which are the younger people, to the advanced grants, which are the experienced people. But basically, there is parity between those. So I was interested in looking globally about other places around the world. And I've looked at places like the US National Science Foundation, which is next. And they published a report in 2015. And they actually have 6 different science foundations. One is the National Institutes of Health. The second one is the National Science Foundation. And the other one is the USDA. It's an agricultural one. And together, those 3 areas fund 85% of the science in the United States. And you can see from the green the success rates between women and men. There's no evidence for disparities at those major granting agencies. The Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and NASA, they basically came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough evidence to really evaluate this. And they said it's due to insufficient data to analyze success rates. There was maybe some evidence of disparities, but they couldn't prove it one way or another. So now they're collecting data in those programs, and we'll be able to analyze that. But this is good news that most of the U.S. national science community has parity in the number of applications that are being awarded. We can go to places like the Royal Society, or small ones like the Swedish Research Council, and they all have parity, and which is good. But there are some distinct examples where it doesn't occur. And I was surprised. This is information from Denmark, and it shows very strong disparity in success rates. And I lived in Denmark for 12 years, and I would say in one way I'm not surprised about this, and in another way I'm really surprised that a major science foundation can have this problem. The second set of bars, they're from something called Nature and Universe, which is the Science Foundation, which is the type of science foundations that I work for. And you can see that men have a 50% higher chance of getting a grant than women do. And it is through almost the entire science foundation, they have these problems. Recently in The Lancet, it's a medical journal. It's probably one of the highest ranked journals in the world. They had a series of articles on success rates between men and women and bias in general. And this is from a paper in there by Whitteman et al. And they were looking at success rates at the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And you can see that all three areas, whether it's the traditional funding, whether it's the project grant or the foundations, there are significant differences between men and women. And they're small. They're 5%. But over time, this really accumulates, and it is a serious problem. And they noted this in the early, I think it was 2012. And so they set up a program to try and do things differently. And they changed the way they were evaluating their grants. And what they did was many grant systems focus on the investigator. And men have better CVs than women, and that has been well established. We're not the one burying children. We have other, we are more successful in many ways. We have more publications. We work differently than women do. And so if they changed their system where the CV wasn't as important. So they did this experiment where they weren't focusing on the caliber of the principal investigator. And when they did that, the success rates were equivalent. And it's amazing that it took as simple as something like that to make the success rates equivalent. The other way that is being done, and it's being done at the U.S. National Science Foundations, the Royal Society, the European Research Council, the Swedish Research Council, is to do bias training, to make people aware that they might have biases and keep them in mind when they're evaluating proposals. And so now the Canadian Institutes of Health Research are changing their procedures. And the last one is to look at what's happening at the Marie Curie grants. And if you look at the pie diagrams on the bottom for 2015, 16, and 17, and this is through all of the different research programs they have at Marie Curie. And one of the things you can see is that men range from 55 to 57%, and women are 43 to 45%. So the parity is pretty good in terms of who is getting money. But I like numbers, and there's a really important number missing, and that's the success rate. So are women getting as many things funded? I don't know what the proportion of women are applying and what the proportion of men. There is one program where we have some data, but it's really hard to understand from the data that I've received that women might have a slightly higher success rate than men. But until we get the data and can analyze it ourselves and look for success rates, I really can't say that the Marie program is good or not good. But they are funding a number of women, which is good. And I'm going to end here. This is the one from the European Research Council. One of the things I didn't talk about was the green line. And the number above it is the number of applications that they got in the physical sciences and engineering program. But I find it truly amazing that only 17% of the applications are coming from women. And I really, frankly, do not understand this. I don't understand why there are so few women applying. The ERC is very concerned about this. They've talked amongst themselves, and they wonder, because they're an elite program, are people not willing to submit grants to elite programs or whatever? It's something that's unknown. But actually, doing reading on this concept, this is from a quote from Nature in 1997, where a number of gender things appeared after that Swedish study. And it says women do not apply for research funding in the numbers that might be expected in medicine and biosciences. But this is physical sciences. It goes across all the grants at the European Research Council. We have this problem in the Swedish Research Council. I would say the number is a little bit higher. It's 30%. But there are many more women in science than the number of women applying. And I don't know the reason for that. And it should be a concern to society. So what can we do? We recommend that all funding agencies implement unconscious bias training. And the other interesting experiment is that we focus on the proposed science and not just the CV in terms of awarding funding. Is there bias in funding? I think one of the problems is you hear that there is, but the numbers are not out there. They're really hard to gain access to. And they tend to be in different languages. So it's really hard for any one person or a small group of people to evaluate across all science foundations. So you rely on the materials that they have in their public documents, which don't necessarily tell you the whole story. But I think it needs to be looked into further. And finally, what I'm really disturbed about is this underrepresentation in number of grant applications for women. And I would like to see a real study take place and try and find this out. And if you have ideas about that, either bring it up in the discussion or come up to me afterwards, because I would like to move this further. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That has been a brilliant presentation. I think there is a lot of food for discussion afterwards. We will move to our next speaker, Maurice O'Brien. He's a lecturer at Cardiff School of Healthcare Sciences. So based on that, we would have never met, probably. We have nothing in common in terms of background. But how we met was that I attended a fantastic training course in Cardiff, and Mo has been behind that and forming and evaluating this course. And this course is about, so it's inclusivity, right? And how to provide how to enhance representation and visibility for the LGBT plus community, and this is open to students, academic staff, and professional support staff of the university. It has been very successful. I'm sure you can tell more about that, and it has been very popular also at other universities in the UK. So.
Good morning, everybody. Very nice to meet you all. And for those of you that were at the dinner last night, I hope everybody's feeling well. How do I? Okay, you probably noticed as well, there's quite a lot of slides on there. I'm not going to blind you with PowerPoint. I believe these are going to be made available to everybody after at some point. So there is further information that I might not get through in 10 minutes. I'm an Irishman, so I like to talk. Okay. Really following on from Daniel, where Daniel's focus very much looking at sort of female inequalities, what we do know is that certainly for the LGBT community, so the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender, those people who sort of align to sort of sexual minority group in terms of their identity. In spite of very, very progressive legislation, as Magda sort of mentioned earlier on, across the European setting, and particularly so in the United Kingdom, we do know that LGBT people are still experiencing quite stark inequalities. And a series of reports here conducted, some of them commissioned by the British government, but actually conducted through Stonewall, which is an organisation that helps to campaign and has made very, very successful moves forward in campaigning for equality legislation and representation of LGBT people. These reports across different sectors of our lives, work, health, society, hate crime and so on, very much focusing on these inequalities that LGBT people experience. And the first one here, the university report. All of these reports have only been published from sort of 2016 to 18, and really alarmed us that in our current sort of state where, really we're in a situation where this is legislated for. And indeed, many of us have professional codes of conduct that we're expected to work towards. Our Equality Act sort of says, of course, yes, we must be treating everybody equally. But the first one there, the university report, certainly does show us that in the university settings, some do it better than others, but very, very often LGBT people do not feel welcome in particular subject areas. In fact, it often starts earlier. Even in their sort of school years, they might be sort of, coming to terms with their sexual identity, coming out and sort of making that known, that they're different. But even careers guidance, teachers and things like that, particularly if they're aspiring often towards sciences, and especially the hard sciences, as we might call them, or the STEM subjects, we find that they are being discouraged from applying. And very often too then, if they do apply, they go through universities. We have evidence that because of people feeling often unsafe in a university environment, or because they are hiding themselves, they're not, this key word here, their authentic selves, that really that causes a lot of unnecessary stress. And of course stress, as we know then, leads to lower productivity and importantly lower educational attainment. And what we are also noticing then, as people sort of move from the undergraduate, postgraduate, PhD and postdoc, we're noticing less representation of LGBT people. We also know that what really, really helps from a university perspective is to be a welcoming environment and actually show openness, that everybody is welcome to apply and that there is this equality of opportunity. There's a legal case behind that, but of course there's a business case and a reputational case too. And certainly from a university perspective, we see those inequalities still in existence. And particularly in the STEM subjects, I've just chosen, there are very few studies actually looking at this, but I've chosen some of the recent ones there that are certainly showing us that heteronormativity is something that pervades. And indeed in our curriculum and the way that we are teaching, and probably many of you will sort of reflect back, it is all very normal, and normal sometimes can be unchallenging. But for people who identify as LGBT students, if they don't see themselves represented in their curriculum, they're going to immediately start to think, well, is this for me? Is there a place for me? LGBT individuals being discouraged from entering into the science, technology, education, math, and indeed medicine, or indeed if they do, and particularly at the doctoral and postdoctorate levels, often being asked to sort of tone it down. Don't let people know, because there will be biases there. And what happens then is, again, people are thinking, yes, it's not a place for me. They drop off that trajectory of progression. And of course, what society does then is loses some very, very rich, sort of intelligent people who have a lot to contribute. So this heteronormativity, it does result in marginalization. Academics themselves, and this is a question that certainly we were able to back up with a study that we did at Cardiff, but academics themselves, when we ask, you know, are you representative of LGBT people in your teaching and learning, in your content? Where does it feature in your curriculum? They would sort of say, well, I don't really know anything about that group, you know, so lack of knowledge leads to a lack of confidence. But many, many people too afraid of saying the wrong thing. That's one thing that people find very, very hard. And, you know, we hear a lot about the use of pronouns and language and what is the correct terminology. People sort of, they get scared about it, so they say nothing. What we say is, just ask. The fear of having to manage highly charged discussions, and I've become a little bit of a talented boy in doing this. You know, sort of when you have a lecture theatre of 300 undergraduate nursing students, my sort of prime audience, and we start talking about difference, and that difference can conflict with people's sort of, you know, their ideals, their beliefs, and so on. Suddenly, yeah, the context of what it is you want to get across in that lecture can, you know, it doesn't happen. Somebody else does this. It's not my role. Yep, so there's always somebody else will do it. Yes, we should do it, but somebody else will do it. In our own school, when I was sort of doing this sort of scoping exercise amongst our academics to see was there LGBT representation anywhere within their healthcare curricula, I was expecting to get some quite positive responses. I got very little back, except I was getting things back that that is actually Maurice O'Brien's job. Why? Oh, well, it's my job because I teach sexual and reproductive health. Oh, wonderful. Well, the anatomy and the physiology of our genitalia, regardless of our sexuality, is the same. Okay, I did a little in terms of professional awareness and raising and so on, but again, it wasn't that much. So somebody else does it. Who does it? It's not a priority area in my teaching or research, challenges my beliefs, so prejudice is there, bias is there. Nobody ever addressed this in any of my educational pursuits, so why should I? It doesn't feature in the curriculum. There's no room in the curriculum. We pack curriculum really tightly, full of stuff, but we often forget some of the more important stuff where people need to see themselves represented. There are some statistics there just to really sort of back up this student experience that I was talking about, but you can have a look at some of those afterwards. These research reports that have been conducted by Stonewall, they have samples of maybe 3,000 to 4,000, one health report in particular up to 5,000. LGBT people and people who are not LGBT, talking about the experiences that they've had and what they've seen. Stonewall approached our school in 2013, Stonewall being the UK's campaigning organisation for LGBT equality. There's some of the legislation that they successfully lobbied government to pass in the UK over the last few years. They approached our school of healthcare sciences in 2013 to ask what is happening in higher education. And what was happening, they wanted to know this on the back of a lot of successful work that they did in second-level education, educating teachers about this, particularly when they're talking to students about sexual relations in education, homophobic, transphobic bullying, this type of thing. They wanted to know what happened in higher education. They approached several higher education institutions and found it very, very difficult to get in there. But one of the reasons they chose Cardiff is, you see these badges here. These are awards that public sector organisations in the UK can apply to for Stonewall, demonstrating evidence that they are an LGBT-friendly employer. And indeed, Cardiff University has been very, very progressive in this way. We have been the top higher education institution in the UK for the last 4 years. We rank at number 11 in 2019's index, which was published in January, number 11 in the top 100. Hey, brilliant. So why did they come to us? We should be doing something good. They came to healthcare sciences thinking we were a sympathetic sort of, subject area, that there should be a lot in there. When I did that scoping exercise with our academic staff, we were getting very little back. So we were inspired to start our project. And our project, so the scoping activity, what was going on, that was hard work, but our project certainly was one that started off initially with a little pilot. We had about 60 academic staff attend a one-day training program after we had developed, working with Stonewall, this program to raise awareness, give examples and best practice as to how LGBT people might be included in the curriculum, but more broadly, how they might be represented in teaching and learning environments. Our pilot only accommodated academic staff. When we finished the pilot, it was positively evaluated, and we started to see LGBT issues being addressed more widely. Some things were very, very subtle, but yet powerful. Where do we go? Well, we always say this after we've done our pilot research. Where do we go next? And this is not necessarily sexy research, because when you apply for research grants, they want to know that there is some sort of tangible outcome to this from the start. We couldn't really prove this. But at Cardiff, we have an education innovation scheme that people can apply for small projects. And we were quite successful after a bit of several attempts at convincing them to give us a little bit of money to help us to develop our project. And our small working group of initially 5 people, it expanded to 14 people. How did that happen? Well, many of those people had attended our pilot program and said, yes, we would like to get involved. We're interested in this. And I'd like to say that the majority of our working group do not identify as LGBT. And that is incredibly important. They are allies. They are showing that they are, if you like, inclusive of this agenda. And of our 14 members currently in our working group, we have academics, professional support staff, a PhD student. Our Dean of Cardiff University for Equality, Diversity, Inclusion has joined as well, which is really, that is senior buy-in, something that has been incredibly important for us to sustain this. And we rolled the project out beyond our school across the 26 other schools of Cardiff University, and through that year we have captured about 450 people attending this one-day training program. Why students, academics and professional support staff? It's so important to have this collective brain, so important to have collective representation, and that is something that has helped us to sustain the project. Because of course all project members, we all have day jobs as well. Some of our project members, they say, this project is my gay job, but my day job obviously sometimes has to take priority. So between the 14 of us, we managed to sustain it and keep it rolled out. So the rest of the presentation really will, when you get it, will provide you with more detail about the content of the training program, some of the tools that we use. It's a highly interactive day. We don't blind people with statistics. We allow them to go away with resources where they can sort of read that. And importantly too, we give them resources from the perspective of best practice guidelines as to how it is they can make representation of LGBT people more visible in their curriculum. And the feedback that we are having from those people who identify as LGBT in our university is really, really positive. And we hope to be able to sustain this project, and we are currently in negotiations with Stonewall for this project to become part of their training programs, their empowerment training programs that they deliver very widely across public sector educations and education institutions across the UK. We're undergoing a full systematic evaluation of that. We hope to complete that by September 19. Why haven't we done it already? Well, we have to give people a chance to make the change. It doesn't happen overnight. And those people that come on the programme also too have to do what we did and convince people that there is value in this. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Maurice. That has been a very inspiring presentation. And having attended, as I said, the course, I think it's a brilliant example, and we can discuss more about the details afterwards. The next speaker is Mandobi Ngoloi. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. She's the co-founder and leader of Black Women in Science, which is a South African non-profit organization. She finished her studies in South Africa, and she's currently a PhD student in Toulouse. And with her work, actually, Mandobi contacted MCAA and GEMS for collaboration towards her vision to promote, actually give more opportunities to women from South Africa for international collaborations, contacts abroad, self-empowerment, and so many more wonderful things. So,
thank you very much. Good morning. Let's see. That's the one. Thank you. As I've been introduced, my name is Mandobi Ngoloi, and I co-founded Black Women in Science with a friend of mine, Doni Mkhunu, who's actually the founder and CEO of this organization. It's an NPC, and we established this in 2015 during our master's years. And we established Black Women in Science really from sharing our experiences with each other and finding that there are a lot of synchronicities with our academic experiences, especially the negative side of experiences within the academic sector. And we found that we really wanted to make a change, and Doni came to me with the proposition of starting an organization to really help us take control of our experience and help transform the sector for women, particularly Black women. And what we do in our organization is we provide leadership and mentorship skills training for women across all scientific disciplines in tertiary institutions, and we also have members who are already in the professional sector, and we have 150 registered members across South Africa, but mainly in 3 cities, the 3 main cities, Cape Town, Durban, and Johannesburg. And we really, I know the first thing that comes to people's minds is why Black? And we chose the word Black specifically because, one, it has a punch to it. It makes you question, and it makes you want to know what the actual problem is. And we're focusing on Black women, which we define as women that come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds and women that were strategically isolated from scientific career opportunities during the apartheid regime. And in South Africa, this includes Indian women, Black African women that look like me, Asian women, and in South Africa we have a term for mixed race, which are colored women. It's not derogatory in South Africa though. And we really want to try and encourage their participation in STEM, because for us, I am a first generation in my family who has actually had the opportunity to pursue a career like this. So before, with the Bantu education system, which really sought to keep Africans, natives, very subservient in jobs that require in low-skilled jobs, previous generations were not really able to infiltrate the scientific discipline. So if we look just at the unemployment rate currently in South Africa, it's quite high, 26.7%. Our population dynamics, we have the majority of the population is Black, and Black women specifically, and we occupy the least positions. We are the least employed. Yet in Africa, I think you would know that we have a majority of female-headed households. So there's quite a big gap between males and females, and that's what we're trying to narrow now. So if you look at the stats in terms of low-skilled workers, that's where you find the highest employed in South Africa. We also want to promote a postgraduate culture, because we found that amongst Black females, there's not really an interest. You know, we were speaking about people being discouraged. When you're not represented, you don't see someone that looks like you within a specific industry, we've found with the women that we work with that they are discouraged to pursue their higher degrees. So they finish their bachelor's, and we have a high percentage of Black female graduates in science that in general, and they do not go beyond the honors degree, a master's and PhD, and we're trying to fix that as well. So if you look at the statistics of females in national science academies and governing bodies, we find that there's a very low percentage of women in general in comparison to men in South Africa. And in sub-Saharan Africa, in the research workforce, there's a majority of males. In South Africa specifically, as I said earlier, the resident population is majority Black female, and the workforce is dominated by white males, then white female, then African males, then African female. So there's quite a big gap there, and something that's quite a problem. So what we're trying to do as Black women in science is create the modern female scientist. So what defines, we always ask the girls that we work with, what defines what a scientist is, you know? And they always express to us that, well, you know what, we don't really want to be put into a box anymore. You know, we want to be able to embrace different aspects of ourselves that make us women, because yes, it is a male-dominated career field, but they feel that they don't really fit in, they're not really within their element. And our actual slogan for Black women in science is in our element. That's what we strive to do, to ensure that all females that do pursue science do feel in their element, and whether this is within their academic careers or professionals once they're done. So we created this model where we try to look at different aspects of what makes the modern female scientist. So we focus on areas like her scientific career, of course, business and entrepreneurship, and social well-being. So with the scientific career, we look at research, method, and design. We try to analyze whether, for example, research topics or projects are tailored to females. So is it safe, for example, if we look at the circumstances in some countries, crime statistics, is it safe for me as a woman to go and conduct my fieldwork in a forest alone? If not, does my funding have provisions for me to have assistants, to have people to accompany me? Does funding also take into consideration things like women who become mothers? If you have 3 years funding and once the time's elapsed, does it provide for perhaps 1 or 2 years where you had to pause your studies to tend to other matters, personal matters? And this is actually a common problem for women, I think, everywhere. Job opportunities also, we saw that there's a problem within the job market and a lack of representation. So how do we then promote critical thinking amongst the women that we work with, trying to help them be more innovative thinkers and step beyond the limitations of what they perceive science to be? So how do we innovate and create or have job creation? And we put our members through courses and training that helps them with this. And mentorship and support is really important as well, especially in regards to mental health amongst women. And they're very unique problems or issues that we have as Black women, specifically within our country, that we can only address, that can only be addressed by people that have lived that experience. Although we do have a lot of allies who are not women of color that work with us because they understand the cause. So that's why representation matters. So you'll see in those photos, it's just a few snippets of the women that we work with, the training courses that they go through. You'll see in the bottom row, in the middle, that's, so we have our members mentor young students as well. So really it's, we go full circle. And this model I just created to show, okay, fine. Really at the base of the pyramid, we have our governments, who are we have leadership, the different departments, so the Department of Science and Technology, legislation put in place to support scientists, women scientists, and these are all these layers really are key players in the student's experience. So, for example, if a student doesn't see people in government, higher learning institutions, so their deans at their universities that represent them, NPOs and organizations like Black Women in Science, professionals, they are less likely to continue or pursue a career in that because, well, I don't see anyone like me in that space, and this is the experience that they've shared with us. So it's really important to see the role that they play. I like to use the analogy of a pyramid because really at the base of the pyramid, that has to be the strongest in order to withstand the weight of the rest of it. But in my opinion, the most beautiful part of the pyramid is the tip, right at the top. You know, that, and that's really for us, the priority is the students, but we have to have government, higher learning institutions, organizations and professionals in order and playing a very important role in order to really encourage our students. But the impact, yes, it's important from the bottom up, but once we have groomed our students and supported them efficiently, the impact really back into the professional sector and these organizations, government, leadership is much higher because we reap the rewards that we sow. So we have students or graduates that go back into the industry who are more inspiring or actually very ambitious to go back into it because they've been supported efficiently. We have students that are, or graduates that are willing to be mentors because they've had that experience as well. Informed leadership and decision making, so people who are highly skilled and qualified to make these decisions because we've put them through different trainings that touch on different subjects. Multi-skilled professionals, so of course, within the professional sector, whether it be research, academics, private or government, you want people who have skills beyond their scientific subject. And we try to help the students that we work with to integrate very well and more seamlessly into the workplace. And then innovative thinking, as I mentioned before, and job creation and economic development, because the women we work with, all of them have a social responsibility project, and it can be an entrepreneurial project or a social development project within their communities, and that helps them create their own mini project and businesses or something that can give back to the community. So there's a bit of outreach that we do as well. So in terms of international prospects, I'm here in France, so I saw this as an opportunity for myself to use this international platform really to collaborate with other scientists in Europe and beyond, and really see, okay, how can we look at the bigger picture, and how can we find a means to work together to fix this problem and also raise awareness and exposure. Because if you look around the room, I'm the only black woman here, you know, and throughout this, the conference, you know, it's very common for me to feel like, wow, oh, hey, girl, nice to see you, because really, that's the experience that we have. And it's not necessarily having a lack of graduates, but it's maybe that feeling of not fitting into the society, so we're not that motivated, and we're trying to change that. And one of those things is to really encourage an international mobility and connect African postgraduate students that are studying here in Europe. So I work on doing that. I do interviews of African students studying in Europe. I've done one of a girl from Zimbabwe and Germany, a few South Africans, a Nigerian, and it's a video a vlog, which we thought would be a really good method to reach out to the youth, because that's what we do now. YouTube, Instagram, you know, you want to see what people do in their real lives, because it actually gives you an idea of, oh, well, this is what you really do when you're abroad. Because I always get questions like that. Oh, what are you actually doing in France? How is life? Well, here's a video. And it shows you what I do in my social life and in my academic life, and why you should also have this experience for yourself. And so what we really have a big goal, and this is my last point for this year, is to have this mobility project for our members. So I said we have 150 members, and they're all working on the social responsibility projects and attend these workshops. Of the entire group, we will select 10 members with very who are qualified and have academic excellence to go on a very short-term mobility experience in an international university. So it could be Europe or really anywhere where they are happy to accept our students, and they will be put through training. So it's basically essentially an international research collaboration on their subject, where they get skills development and training, exposure, cultural exchange, and we really want to start getting them to think about having collaborations and just international thinking. So that's our major goal for this year. And if there is anyone who would like to get involved in this, or a lab, for example, that would like to host students, perhaps sponsorships, we're really open to that. And these are women from all disciplines of science, really good students also. So I want to thank you for listening to my presentation, and hope to work with some of you one day.
Thank you very much, Mantobi. We are looking forward to collaborate with the organization. The next speaker is Tanya Romacho. Tanya is the secretary of the Gender Equality and Diversity Working Group of MCAA. She's a postdoc now back in her home country, in Madrid, but she's been quite mobile, being what we call senior postdoc, like myself. We have been discussing a lot about how things have changed in the academic work environment and how new difficulties have come in, which are like the problems of stability and feeling safe to settle down and have the opportunity and have fair opportunities actually in the work environment.
So, good morning, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction. You must excuse me, but my knee is not doing so well, so I will do it standing up. I would like to start with a question for the audience. Who of you, please raise your hands, who of you has a contract for longer than who doesn't have a contract for longer than 6 months? Who doesn't have a contract for longer than 1 year? Please raise your hand. Who doesn't have a contract for longer than 2 years?
Sorry, I have a problem understanding the structure of your question.
Is your contract lasting more than 6 months?
Yes.
Is your contract lasting more than 1 year?
Yes, but this is a better phrased question.
Yeah, excuse my English, I'm not a native speaker. Okay. But just, you've seen some hands raising up. So I would like to tell you my personal story, not because it's any special, but because I think maybe it's the story of many of us. And I will use it to put some topics on the table. So I come from a privileged background. My story is a bit different from Mantombi. My first role model was my mother. I'm the proud daughter of a single mother who was a professor in physics. So then when I tell my mom, I think I want to do a PhD, she says, that's good, but have in mind that this is a long-distance career. And maybe I will add long-distance and endurance career. So I start my PhD. Of course, what many of you are going through it right now or have already gone through it, it's challenging. It's a lot of hard work, but it's very motivating and very interesting. You get to travel to many places to have a lot of interesting experience, both in the lab and outside the lab. And at the end of the day, if your fellowship is not that big, okay, it's your first job, it doesn't really matter. You're young and life is beautiful. So I defended my thesis. And then when I was starting to look for a position abroad, in other places of Europe, in my case, something unexpected happened. But this can happen to anybody. I could have got pregnant, for example, or I could have collapsed after the defense of the thesis. What specifically happened to me was that my mother got sick, and then I decided to stop and taking care of her. In the meantime, I was preparing applications to go to Germany for a postdoc. Actually, I prepared a Marie Curie action. In the meantime, I was taking care of my mother. Some colleagues with the best intentions actually suggested me to mask the fact that I was taking care of a sick family member, because maybe you come across as a troublesome candidate. So think about that. Now, I know things are changing, because in many applications you can have the elapsed time for sick leave or family care, but at that time, many applications were not taking this time into account. So sometimes you have to mask it on your CV. Good. Unfortunately, things got complicated and my mother died, and I moved to Germany, not in my best personal moment. I think I failed to myself in this regard, because I remember when I did my first PhD interview, who will become my mentor asked me, would you like to stay in academia after your PhD? And I said, yes, but not at any cost. And I failed to myself, because instead of taking time for myself to pull myself back together, I immediately jumped into my postdoc in Germany. So in the meantime, you're giving your 200% to try to get that big paper that is going to make things easier in your academic career. You supervise, you teach, you do a lot of lab work to get that paper, you evaluate, you try to go through accreditation processes, and in the meantime, important personal questions are floating around. What is awaiting for me in Germany? Shall I try to move back to Spain? At what point is it good to go back to academia? But in my postdoc time, I learned 3 very important concepts that I was not so familiar with before. First, work-life balance. And second, burnout. I saw some colleagues having burnouts, but I also learned about positive things. I could join a mentoring program for female postdocs, and that was really helpful to give me tools to pursue a career in academia, and also to realize that independently of the discipline, the struggles and challenges that the other female colleagues go through are very similar to your own challenges. So why pre-academia? Why this title in the talk? Because in the last years, academia and precariousness come hand by hand. And I think this is an issue we really need to talk about. Why? So we are suffering sometimes an undesired hypermobility. Mobility is key to research. It's in the cultural, scientific needs, of course, to do a certain experiment, to get to collaborate with groups that will improve your project. But sometimes the way to get a job is to change from one country to another, leading to the figure of permadocs, permanent postdocs, from one postdoc to another, and this euphemism of the young promise, the eternal early career researcher. Sometimes you discuss this with older professors, and they tell you, but it's always been like that. No, sorry, it has not always been like that. And here's the PNA's paper from last year. It's very interesting. They analyzed 3 different disciplines, and they see that the half-life of the scientists publishing in these fields, while in the 50s and 60s, it was around 30, 35 years what somebody was lasting in research, in the last years, it's only 5 years. This means there is one leader and a temporary workforce around, a single-use researchers that do their PhD and leave. And this is a pity, because we're wasting talent and resources. What about motherhood, for example, or parenthood? I observed in my experience in academia 2 strategies. The German strategy. Is there any German in the room? Yes. Okay. I do it with love. I learned another concept, the Rabenmutter. That means the mother crow. They refer to this to women who have children and want to develop a career. This is terrible. This is terrible. So I saw very brilliant colleagues leaving academia, not because they did not like it, but because they just wanted to get a safe, stable job to be able to have children. In Spain, the strategy is different. The strategy corresponds to this picture. We postpone and postpone and postpone having children with the hope that someone in the family gets a permanent position. And in the meantime, we're traveling with our backpacks up and down. It's a joke, but it's a way to depict a reality. So what about work-life balance? I have more or less tried to cluster in 4 big threats of work-life balance of our researchers, things that really don't make it so easy to have a work-life balance in this profession. We have to be harder, better, faster, stronger. Publish in the highest impact journals, evaluate other colleagues, put ourselves into accreditation processes, teaching and applying for funding all the time. And this actually leaves us little time to research, which is actually why we decided to become a researcher. So it's okay, it's clear that we are multitask and that's the way it has to be, but sometimes we have some administrative burdens that are totally unnecessary, but we can discuss this later. Another one is we have to be always on, always reachable, with the email, with the phone, always ready to jump. It's difficult to concentrate because we're permanently interrupted. And that means that we also have to work after the work. Because at work, we sometimes, or maybe we share an office, or, you know, it's complicated to stay focused sometimes. The toxic shame, we are under permanent evaluation. That's part of the game, but sometimes the game is not so fair. Sometimes these evaluations come in a very aggressive tone, and then we start thinking, am I a fraud? Am I an imposter? And then the enthusiasm trap. We love what we do. We're passionate about research. That's fantastic because then you can cope and be more resilient. But since you love it, you will do it for free. You will do extra hours without taking into account that you're stealing time for other things. So I think this is an issue we really, and also seeing the other sessions on mental health, I think this is an issue for everyone at any career stage. So when I'm about to go for my second postdoc in France, there's again an unexpected turn. I'm in the quest for the big paper that's gonna boost my career, but then I go through a divorce, and I find myself alone, far away from my family, and having to take care of a dog. And well, it looks stupid, but when you don't have so much time, this is an issue. But it turns out that by this situation, this time I decide I'm not going to fail to myself. I call the group and I say, I'm very sorry, I'm going through a very bad personal situation, I cannot do this second postdoc. And I take time for myself to pull myself back together and to really think what is my next step in my career. This situation is really helpful to make me realize that we must put care in the center of the stage. Because the scientists, or the researchers, we are under a lot of pressure in a highly competitive, highly stressful environment. It should not be that if you get sick, or somebody in your family gets sick, or you want to have the right to have the time to take your dog for a walk, or take care of yourself, your career is over. It should not be like that, because then in the end, then research is something restricted for healthy and wealthy people. Anybody can get sick at some point. So this is really an issue I think that we must take care of. What is my situation now? My situation now, it's from one side good, because I got a National Attraction Talent Fellowship, so I could come back home to continue my research. In the last months in Spain, there have been some good advances. There was the campaign Scientist or Mother. In biomedical research, there were some grants where the parental leave time was not counting, and they will evaluate you for this funding, taking into account the last 5 years of your career, no matter if you had children or not. Now this has changed, thanks to this campaign in the summer, and so I find myself in this point. I'm a degree C according to the European standard. That means a senior postdoc. This is male representation, and this is female representation, so I'm going down the hill. The good news is I work in the life sciences biomedical research field. The good thing is we are more women than men, so we are not underrepresented in this field. However, if we take a look at the people evaluating funding proposals from people at my stage, we find, surprise, surprise, that there's a 67% underrepresentation in the evaluation panels for life sciences. So my question is, how come if we were more women, there's less women in the evaluation panels for our area? We can discuss this later. This is fresh data from 2 weeks ago from the Spanish Ministry of Science. And I don't know if I will ever become a group leader, honestly. I would like to, but at this point, I don't know. What I know is what kind of leader I would not like to become. I think we must change the models of leadership, make it more integrative, be a leader and not a boss, create a good environment between the people of the work team, and to be connected. There's a very interesting paper in Nature from last year where they really depict how disconnected the BIs are from their team. But, however, they agree on something, whether the PIs and the non-PIs say we should reduce the focus on high-impact papers. This is also to take into account. And actually, the standards of excellence must be re-evaluated because this publish or perish is killing two pillars of research, which are objectivity and integrity. In this other paper from PLOS ONE, maybe you know it, it's from a biomedical research center, 30% of the PhD students say they have felt pressure to publish results that were not really correct, just to support the hypothesis. So, yeah. So we also need a different role model. One size does not fit all. Every person is different. So when you look for a role model, maybe excellent is good, but also think about empathy. Maybe a person can have a very excellent CV, but is not able to put herself or himself in your shoe. And bad news, everybody. Pre-academia is not only a female problem. We suffer with double the pressure, probably, but it's going to affect all of you. So I think it's something we must discuss. I don't want to finish with a message of despair. I want to bring some hope. This is ideas that I think could help improve these problems. So I think we must really fight for work-life balance, the right to care and have care. I think happy teams are more efficient teams in the end. We need help to support these administrative burdens that steal time from research and to make policies for stable and regulated incomes according to each research category and rethink the standards of excellence so that they are in line with the responsible research. As I said, to reshape the models and the way the leaders work, and maybe we must think at some good initiatives in Australia or the United Kingdom to see how we can improve this. Thank you very much for your attention, and I just want to really thank Dr. Sánchez-Luque for the fruitful discussion preparing this talk, the wonderful people from the GEMS group, and you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to all, each one of you, and you all. I know we're running very late. I just didn't want to interrupt these wonderful talks. I have many questions, but I will not start the discussion. So, please. How do we do this?
Thank you all. Very interesting talk. Thank you, Tanya, for sharing your story. Basically, your story, like when I was listening to your story, that was like 70% of my story too. But on top of that, I have also the mobility issue. So I just wanted to bring this discussion topic that is there anything that can support us? Because I have this 2 years contract, which my clock is running, super scary, and I know that if I cannot get another contract, I also need to go back, and I don't want. So I just wanted to bring up, because it's on top of everything for the women coming from outside of the European Union, it's also the mobility issue on top of everything.
So, okay. So thank you, Saba, for the question. If you want to intervene, but I totally agree with you. I think reaching a certain career stage, they should maybe give less funding for short things that in the end are not going to help, and maybe cluster in longer contracts. Because depending on your field, 2 years is nothing. to get the outcomes of the project. So maybe, for example, in this SAGE program in Australia, what they do to support female senior postdocs, it's to give them, for example, a 4 or 5 years contract, so that you have enough time to get the next funding, because 2 years is nothing. And of course, I think it's also important to say the hypermobility and cultural and adaptation problems. I mean, it was already hard for me to move to Germany, which is within Europe. I can imagine moving from out of Europe to Europe is also an issue in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I am really struggling with, I work in 5 different countries across like 6 different labs, and each time I'm moving, I'm basically working on the publication of my previous lab, and it's just so frustrating because you cannot focus on your current project because you need to just publish, and okay, I put the seed 2 years ago on some project that the fruit come true. I was never I couldn't stay in that lab to continue my research, and you see that, oh, your research taken away from you, and it's just not one time, not 2 times, it's just permanently like that, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah, I think really science policy has to take measures on these too, because what excellence are you going to achieve when you're just jumping from one project to the other every 2 years? I mean, so I think maybe less grants, but shorter time. I mean, longer time.
I would like to add something to this for the discussion, because as I said, I'm in a similar situation, still not back home, and I don't see this happening in the near future. So I think, because we gathered some questions also online, and one of the questions was like, what kind of skills do we need to have a successful career and reach the leadership stages? And I think we can talk about this. We have already talked about this, but it's not only the skills and our personal will and enthusiasm. It's something that should change in terms of like policy. We need to understand that this is not efficient in the long term, and there should be a way to give possibilities and opportunities for like longer term contracts and work environment. So I think this is something that I already mentioned to the general director that was a keynote speaker. I don't know if you had the chance to attend it. That is not only startups, it's not only like working with the young generation and changing the mentality. We need to do something to support researchers at this stage. Otherwise, it's very probable that they will go down.
Thank you for all your presentations. I have always this question, because I've worked on gender equality, and then now I work on inclusion of migrants, and I always find it difficult to bring together all these strands. So we had a presentation about gender equality, then it was about LGBT, black women. Your last one was a bit more universal, but how can we bring all that together? So how do we look at men and women, black women, how many grants they apply for? Same among LGBT, are there differences between men and women, gay men and gay women? If we think of, I mean, the world is very complex, and it's very hard to go in all the nuance. But I think if we could have another workshop another time, just to discuss how to work together and take each other into account in the work, I think that would be very promising. I don't have the answer, it's only a question.
Would you like to answer? I will give the microphone. While giving the microphone, I wanted to say that a way to face that, in my opinion, is that, first of all, to listen to the different perspectives, and also to talk about fair opportunities and not men or women or LGBT or young or old or scientists, because we have this lack of fair opportunities, and this is what we should face, listening to each group, of course, and trying to put it together.
Thank you for that question. That is a question that our own project group have, that has really been illuminated to us, and we haven't got the solutions at all. But certainly in those research reports that I was referring to, which are all free to download from Stonewall for anybody to read, you actually notice in there the sort of quite, as well as LGBT people speaking, but the quite high representation from people in black, minority, ethnic, people who identify as disabled, these groups as well, and actually saying they're in a situation of double jeopardy because they are identifying with sort of one or more, probably several of these what we call the protected characteristics from a UK perspective, which is legislated for. But you're right, it is challenging. And there is even sort of less visibility and representation when you also have these other added characteristics as well. So it is a challenge for us. And something else, another organisation who is presenting that challenge, any of you who are involved in the Athena Swan, very much looking at gender equality and particularly advancing female careers. But Athena Swan charter submissions to the Advanced HE in the United Kingdom are asking us that question as well. Demonstrate how it is you're addressing this intersectionality across, and it's a challenge.
Hi, I would maybe play a bit of the devil's advocate here. So I've been in science for 19 years, my husband as well. We left science to get more stability. My husband was now fired from one day to another, which is possible in Austria, right? So stability is relative, right? And it's not about who's off worse, right? It's not about that. This is country number 7 for us, 2 children, so it's a nightmare, right? What I'm surprised about, sorry, this is very loud. I mean, science is changing, but the biggest change is that it becomes more and more competitive. When I did my PhD, we were much less students that entered, right? And people should be more aware of what they're entering. Policies need to change, the way science needs to change, yes. But to be honest, I hear a lot of whining about stability and entitlement of being able to pursue this career. You know the pyramid is extremely getting flat and flatter and flatter. And we're entering a monoculture of science. So I gave a talk at my institute as well at the moment regarding, science is not reaching diversity anymore. It's reaching monoculture, which maybe also goes back to your question. It's a certain attitude, it's a certain work commitment and a work freedom that you're having to be able to do this. And it's also for men. I mean, the men applauded this session like crazy because also fathers these days can also not stay in science. So I think people need to we need to change policies, but this is not going to happen overnight. I've been busy with it for 20 years, right? So you need to know what you get yourself into and know that it's only going to be like 1% that can go on. So you have to make alternative plans. You cannot count on this career. And it's your self-responsibility. With 2 kids, I never worked, I worked weekends, but no, I went to my supervisor and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this, right? I mean, it's a bit the entitlement of we should be able to pursue this for men and women, but I go no, people, you have to look for alternatives because also in the world out there, you can be fired from one day to another, right? I'm sorry, but I give leadership courses, I give implicit bias trainings, my movie is showing at the ERC, every grant panel interview. I'm a diversity and inclusion officer, so I come with a lot together, but what starts to disturb me more and more is this entitlement, I should be able to do this, and I should actually have the money, and I should be able to go home at 5 o'clock and do whatever I want. You have a freedom in science, working hours and everything, that is so valuable as well, right? These things as well, don't forget this. There are really great things, but you have to make it yourself. And I'm sorry if this is, so tough for some people, but see also what you're having. A 2-year contract is sometimes, you're wow. Yeah, I'm sorry. And I agree, policies need to change, science needs to change. But you have to know what the situation is at the moment and have the self-responsibility to deal with it. Sorry.
I believe we all know what we're talking about because we experience it, but thank you. This is a very, would you like to? A second.
I agree with you. I'm scared. I agree with you that the PhD students need to know what they're jumping into, of course. But I will also ask a question. What do you think some ERC projects have been coming as a fraud because people have been faking data to get the super duper paper? I think so. Of course, people have to be aware what they jump into, but hyper-competitivity is leading us to misconduct, and this is also very dangerous. Yes, but we should be competitive and fair because we are scientists.
Okay.
There is reporting going on, so since you're talking like that, people cannot follow the discussion from there, so we should meet. Sorry.
I just wanted to add to that comment, sorry, is that I think we also need to address the issue of intentional exclusion and how we work around that, because that's more of a social issue within the scientific community. So there's a big social proponent to exclusion, and I think mentorship might just the idea of mentorship might also help people get a realistic idea of what it will be like to enter into the professional world. So that's something that we could look into, and also improving the skill sets that the scientists have so that you're not limited to just, okay, this is what I did for my PhD, but how can I be innovative and expand beyond this and create something for myself beyond the limitations of, well, the options that are on the table. So that's an idea.
I think that should be, I'm really sorry, this has been very interesting, but we should stop after this question, so try this.
I just wanted to mention a workshop that we're having at 1:30 today, and it's to develop a career assessment matrix that incorporates responsible research and innovation. So some of what we've been talking about here, if you could bring that perspective to our workshop and try to develop a policy for science that's more inclusive and embraces diversity, I think it would be really helpful. You know, I appreciate that we need a reality check, but at the same time, do all that we can to change the policy right now that's selecting who gets to progress in their careers, I think would be helpful.
Thank you very much.
And just, may I just say the room number, because it wasn't in the agenda so nobody knows, is SR3.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is the last question, and we promise we will allow you to go for coffee.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask this question. First of all, thank you all for your wonderful presentations. As one of the very few male attendees of this session, I have the impression that I'm not fully convinced that there is an obvious inequality between male and female regarding like proposal applications and publications. I mean, as Professor Daniel Conley said, maybe the submission rate is also a very important factor. You have to take that into consideration. And some data regarding the Lancet publication rate, I don't know how the data was calculated. I mean, how many submissions and what's the effective submission rate, like why there is a significant gender inequality there. So
I would recommend that you go to the literature and you look at these publications. It is extremely clear that there's gender bias. And there's gender bias in lots of different things. Like the first thing that I put up was gender bias in inviting people to write applications. There's gender bias in how much women get paid compared to men. There's statistics to back this up. It's just not, oh, I feel this. There's definite statistics that are available in almost every country about many of these issues. I think there are many questions that are uncertain, and that's one of the things that I touched on was about gender bias in terms of grant writing, but it exists in certain science foundations, and it doesn't exist in others. And I think we have to take a systematic study and use good techniques to evaluate these kinds of things, because I think it exists. And it's clear from some of the studies that have been published, like the Lancet study, it was a very, very high quality study. And I suggest that you go and read that, and hopefully you'll be convinced when you read the article carefully.
okay, thank you for the answer. But as Tania mentioned, there are more maybe female biologists, but somehow the application successful rate is relatively lower for female scientists. How is that? I mean, how come?
Thank you. We really have to stop the discussion. I just wanted to mention something before you go, or you can start going. So it's about a platform that it's a database for role models. It's a very interesting project. It has a database for role models, and also it works as a mentoring project. So here is Jana. She's the project manager of this, and please talk to her. It's a very interesting project if you want to get involved, and GEMS is supporting this project. Thank you very much, all of you. Have a wonderful coffee break.